In July of 1847, Mormon pioneers entered the Salt Lake Valley believing they had finally found a place of refuge. After years of persecution, exile, and violence, Utah represented safety and religious freedom. But the valley was not empty. It was home to native peoples, particularly Ute bands, who had lived, hunted, and traded across the region for generations. For several years, relations between Mormon settlers and native tribes were tense, but largely nonviolent. Brigham Young publicly promoted what he called a policy of feed them rather than fight them, a phrase preserved in sermons and territorial correspondence housed in church archives. Yet by 1853, that fragile peace collapsed. By the early 1850s, Mormon settlements had expanded rapidly into Utah Valley, Sanpete, and central Utah, moving directly onto Ute lands. According to church-published histories, this expansion disrupted traditional hunting grounds, damaged native trade networks, and interfered with long-standing economic practices. At the same time, Brigham Young held extraordinary authority. By 1851, he was president of the church, governor of Utah Territory, and superintendent of Indian affairs. Religious leadership, civil government, and native policy were concentrated in a single office. When violence erupted, there was no clear separation between spiritual authority and political power. In the summer of 1853, a series of killings involving settlers and native groups led by Wakara, also known as Walker, ignited what became known as the Walker War. Church histories date the conflict from 1853 to 1854. Raids and retaliatory attacks spread across central Utah. Settlements were targeted, livestock stolen, and fear spread throughout the territory. Brigham Young authorized the Utah Territorial Militia to defend communities, ordered the fortification of towns, and instructed settlers to abandon isolated farms. Contemporary settler diaries, later quoted in church sources, describe displacement, hunger, and constant anxiety. At the same time, Brigham Young continued to preach restraint. Sermons from this period show him urging settlers not to seek vengeance and emphasizing the importance of feeding native groups when possible. This contradiction lies at the heart of the Walker War. While peace was preached, armed conflict continued for nearly a year. Church records acknowledge that dozens of settlers were killed during the war. Native casualties were described as significant, though exact numbers were not recorded, a silence that continues to shape how the conflict is remembered. In May of 1854, negotiations brought the Walker War to an end. Peace was declared, but the consequences lingered. Native displacement accelerated, settlements expanded further into contested lands, and trust between native peoples and Mormon settlers deteriorated. The Walker War established a pattern that would repeat in later conflicts, including the Utah Black Hawk War more than a decade later. It revealed the strain created when religious authority, territorial governance, and survival collided on the frontier. History leaves us with an uncomfortable question. When a prophet governs both church and state during a war, and violence follows, where does responsibility lie? Is accountability spiritual, political, or both? That question remains debated not because the events are unclear, but because power and responsibility were never clearly separated.